The Spin-off Podcast Network.
'Tis the season to share the joy with the Instax Mini 40 Instant Camera. With a classic design, you can capture each and every festive moment and print them out on the spot. Make this holiday season unforgettable and gift the Instax Mini 40 Instant Camera. Don't just take, give. Visit instaxus.com to shop.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to Gone by Lunchtime. I'm Toby Manhire. Annabelle Matha, kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm the mother of a 25-year-old. As of
25?
As of 7:29 a.m. yesterday, I'm the mother of a 25-year-old.
Oh, congratulations.
So I did what most Māori mothers would do, and I took the opportunity to remind her that at her age I had 2 children and that she needs to start, really considering her life choices.
Kia ora, Ben. How's it going in Wellington?
It's another grey day, another grey summery day in the capital.
And hello to Isaiah, who's sitting in Whitia here today on the desk of 1,000 Dreams.
Hello.
Brace yourself for big things. What's your most wildest dream?
My wildest dream? Oh, do I need to keep
Right
it?
now. This is happening right now, isn't it?
Do I need to keep
This
it
is
PG?
your wildest dream. Yeah, this is strictly a M podcast.
Oh, what is my wildest dream?
Career-wise.
Just to have a job.
Okay, consider it done because you've worked on this podcast this is the place where dreams come true.
Annabelle's daughter is not the only exciting birthday. We've got another one in the coalition, and Christopher Luxon, 1 year, Prime Minister. Huge. We'll talk about that in a minute, along with the haka and the Hīkoi and the other haka, perhaps, and, if we've time, a word on the gang patch ban and the new police commissioner, and who knows what else might crop up along the way. But first, just a word on Nikki Kaye, who has died at the age of 44. Very sad news. Nikki Kaye, I think all of us will have had some dealings with her. I didn't know her super well, but I did see her around a fair bit and was just constantly impressed by her determination and her conscientiousness and I guess her curiosity. I always thought one of the things about Nikki is she was properly curious, and it feels particularly cruel coming at the end of a year which began with the loss of Fesso Collins, another really exceptional human being in his 40s, just far too soon, but both such curious, determined, interesting, authentic, open people who just wanted to hear good ideas and engage in them properly, and the sort of people that we want in our politics and, in our society. So it's terribly sad to lose Nikki Kaye. Obviously her cancer, which was diagnosed when she was in Parliament, was worse than I think she'd let on. Some people who are close to her have indicated in the last 24 hours that was the case. And, she left, as you remember, in that maelstrom that surrounded the exit of Todd Muller. And she gave us some really moving interviews, and that just confirmed, I listened back to a couple yesterday of how she was really someone who was in it for the right reasons. She was really not driven by an ego or any other narcissism or any of that sort of stuff. She was properly there for the right reasons. It's a big loss, Annabelle.
A huge loss. I always had an interest in her career because she won Auckland Central, which my mum had won back in 1993, but she was the first national MP to do so. And I think that Auckland Central and particularly the islands of the Gulf, we're lucky to have her because, the islands of the Gulf are such special places, in terms of conservation and all of that stuff. So to have elected a national MP who was a true blue-green was to the good fortune of the Gulf, and she worked really hard to protect Aotea Great Barrier and had a long-running love affair with that place. So I was really, really sad to hear of her passing, like you say, just a woman who, with an open mind, prepared to support any good idea, irrespective of what side of the house it might come from. A lot of people get elected to Parliament and then turn around and basically ignore their electorates, but she has a reputation of being a phenomenal advocate for Auckland Central. So I'm just so sad, so sorry to hear of her passing. I think, when people say politics was better for her being in it, they're absolutely right.
Ben?
Honestly, and there's something a little bit self-serving about this, but, I think you can always tell, you can tell politicians' character, I think, in some ways, between the length of time it takes for them to reply to your text when they're seeking a candidacy, when they're running as a candidate, when they're elected as an MP, and then when they become a minister. And usually that reply time gets longer and longer and longer. And with Nikki Kaye, exactly the same all the way through. And I think probably it wasn't just me and people who had known her from the beginning. It was the same immediate response to every member of part of her electorate who had an issue to deal with. Anyone who ever wanted to raise a concern. She was the hardest working and best electorate MP I've ever come across. She made my and the lives of other ministerial staff as hell by being constantly on the phone, often with someone from her electorate who had something that she needed sorted out immediately. The traditional electorate MP sort of gets a staffer to write a letter, dash off a letter and send it to a minister and sort of wipe their hands and say, job well done. Nikki personally followed up everything multiple times. In anything that her electorate brought to her became the most important issue in her life. And it's incredible. She really rose through politics, not by playing politics, but doing everything the right way by beating the odds to first get selected for Auckland Central, then to win it, wearing out 2 pairs of shoes notoriously, door knocking every house in the electorate twice, and just one of the most driven people I've ever met. And really driven to do the right thing and never compromised on her values. As a first-term MP, stood up against the government's her own government's mining policy, marched down Queen Street, and got that policy reversed. She was taken far too soon. It's a personal tragedy, politically unfortunate. And Godspeed, Nikki.
I do want to see at some point your spreadsheet, Ben, of all the response times of different MPs and under the different category headers. That would be quite revealing.
Fascinating.
Do some data journalism. If you want to know the measure of the woman of Nikki Kaye, you just need to look at some of the messages that have been posted by women who, of all political stripes, who have been through their own struggles with cancer, who have talked about how Nikki was constantly in touch and supporting them. Look at Marama Davidson's post, Jan Tinetti's, Kerry Allen's. I'm sure there are more. And that stuff is all done privately, and none of that is for gain or glory. But that's Nikki Kaye, so she will be much missed. Right, let's talk about the 1 year on coalition. I feel as though it's Christmas for people who love 1 year summaries, isn't it? Because we had a whole lot of 1 year since the election stuff, much of which was really perhaps even on this very podcast discussing the first year of the coalition. Now we have today, Wednesday, the 27th of November, is in fact the 1 year anniversary of the coalition being sworn in, I think. And then shortly, in a few weeks, we'll have the end of year roundup. So it's just all this. It's just a lot of one yeariness, isn't it? We one
God,
yeary
it's so
weary.
awful, eh?
Sorry
And then I
about
feel
that.
like we did a whole lot of 1 year
we
stuff
did.
in October when it was a year on from the
I
election.
just said that. That's what I just said. You weren't listening, right? That's what I just
Well,
said.
it was
just
boring.
then. Yeah.
It's not my fault.
Christopher Luxon has given a round of interviews, sit-down interviews, talked about the big rocks and the boiled ocean. He said at one point, boiled ocean is a phrase. I think I understand it correctly. It's like the idea is that you don't try and take on tasks that are impossible, like boiling the ocean. You know, you kind of want to, rather than trying to chunk it down.
Oh, is it not about climate change?
Not the big rocks. I don't think it's about climate change
Yeah,
specifically.
Points
right?
Points off for that then.
I really thought it was this road to COP29 sort of conversion, because he had said, we don't just want to sit around and boil the ocean. And I was like, are we looking at a big pivot on climate change policy here? But
can I read out a line from one of the interviews? This is verbatim, and he's talking about what other governments do and how he disapproves of them. And he says, this is a verbatim quote: "They're just boiling the ocean. They're throwing out the slogans and the bumper stickers." Those are consecutive sentences, so
They need to be laser focused.
But
that's what they're doing.
The thing is, if you do boil the ocean and you put enough big rocks in,
yes,
you're ready for a hangi.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, or a lovely sauna.
Oh yeah.
And definitely rising sea levels. What did you make of it all, Ben? I'm sure you have read through all of those interviews. It came after, by the way.
Thanks for the 8 links you sent us, by the way.
Very welcome. You're most welcome. I love a link. It came in short time after that evisceration by your old friend, Ben Matthew Hooton, which was a really blistering assessment of Christopher Luxon. But he seemed very chirpy in these interviews. He doesn't seem like, I don't think I could survive if Matthew Hooton wrote that about me. And that's why I'm not the Prime Minister, and that's why I'm boiling the ocean. What did you make of it all?
I thought the sort of round of those interviews were all done. I'm not quite sure when, but they were sort of embargoed to be released, on the day of the anniversary, the day of national celebration. And from it, what I really gathered about Christopher Luxon, the man, is that he would have been excellent at job interviews and in recruitment processes.
You mean when he's conducting the job interview, or
I think for a job, because
you
can see there's a process of listening and learning going on, and from that I think you can kind of piece together, like CSI, the order that the interviews were done in. So in the RNZ interview with Craig McCulloch, I'm just quoting from their write-up. Asked what he might do differently with hindsight, Luxon offers up only some communication difficulties, quote, on the margins. I don't think there's much I'd do differently, he says. The big things that we've got to get right for the future of the country, I'm very satisfied with. What about the cancer drugs promise? Quote, I think there was a communication challenge initially, but I'm very proud of where we got to. And then in Luke Malpass's write-up for the Post, but after a year in office, Luxon has nominated the budget debacle around cancer drugs as his biggest mistake. And so, in the first night, he's like, shit, I didn't prepare an answer. Aaron's is like, what about the cancer drugs? He's like, got it. So, I think that is...
just to reiterate, the Prime Minister is welcome on this podcast.
What I thought was most unfortunate, I think, is that he didn't have any learnings to share, and I think he actually said that he hadn't really he didn't have any lessons from the first year. I think
he said no regrets. He said no regrets.
I think RNZ had lessons.
No lessons.
Yeah. And I think that's unfortunate because he may only have 2 more years to write his business book. So, for that, I think you'd probably want like 10 to 12 lessons as chapter headings. I don't know. Look, maybe it just takes a bit more time to percolate on it. Very interesting. The companion interviews in the Post that have run over the last couple of days with David Seymour and Winston Peters. Where David Seymour has claimed a disproportionate influence on government, and I think, what was the lead for Peters? Peter said that the Prime Minister was struggling, but actually that was fine.
Disproportionate was an interesting choice of word, wasn't it?
These 360 performance reviews are not maybe not what the team needs.
But yeah, I mean, there is a sort of slight sense of Christopher Luxon just sort of grinning his way through it, as he did when he was. There was a very nice moment on Morning Report. Was it yesterday when it was put to him that David Seymour had just described the disproportionate influence that Act had wielded, and he just sort of laughed. And in a way, that's the best way to deal with it, right? You just sort of let the problem for, as we've discussed at length, is that the smaller parties in any coalition or governing arrangement either get lost or sidelined or blamed, and then they're ruined come the next election. And how do you square that circle? Well, maybe this is it. Like, both of the two parties in the coalition are still polling over 5%. They're therefore disinclined to torpedo the government. They're therefore up to a point where if they can hang on until within the sight of the next election, then from a political management point of view, that's a triumph for Christopher Luxon in a way, isn't it, Annabelle?
I think that he's in a really difficult position that no other Prime Minister under MMP has experienced before of dealing with two aggressively ambitious coalition leaders who don't seem to toe the line when it comes to the airs and graces you might expect when it comes to the senior coalition partner. I think over the last Seymour more so than Peters. Time and time again we see Seymour undermining Luxon and his leadership, and saying things like their disproportionate level of influence in the government. I mean, you would think that the natural reaction to that would be to put them in their place and remind them who the boss is. But instead, we see Luxon, like you say, laughing it off. What's the right thing to do? I really don't know. I think that there'll be people out there who see the lack of action by Luxon in terms of keeping his partners in line as a weakness, and there'll be others that think he's playing a longer game and laughing them off as the right approach. I'm really not sure, and I wonder, in terms of National and National's caucus, how they feel about that situation, because in some ways it's more important than how New Zealanders might feel about it, because ultimately they're the one that put him in the leadership position. So,
and particularly if some of them think, well, this is all very well if you're allowing this oxygen and this long leash to your coalition partners, but if it's going to cost me my seat, then I don't love that trade-off, right? The other, Winston Peters also, in the interview there, I noted that he had a good line when he was asked about the relationship with ACT, when we remember, of course, the constant salvos and, poisonous exchanges in the lead-up to the election. And he said, Winston said, I don't see too many married couples that go around town describing how the marriage is going on. So I'm not going to talk to you about that, which has really kind of gone up a notch in terms of
they've really moved on from the table to
where he feels about David Seymour. Although it does bring into fresh context the earlier references to one or the other being a cuck, which is some most marvelous decorum in Parliament, which we expect. What's your view on that? The general glue in that coalition.
Look, I think it's working much better than anybody would have expected a year ago. Part of that, I think, is because Luxon, I don't think that the sort of rope-a-dope where he just sort of sits back and sort of politely ignores, the Seymour acting out and Peter's sort of, making pronouncements about his sort of experience and virtuosity compared to his partners. I don't think that's what he sort of planned or envisaged, but I think it's sort of inevitable. We keep talking about how this is an unprecedented situation in terms of the three-way coalition. It could have been precedented, but, this is the first time, like that old story about, the baby elephant that's, tied down to tied by a rope to a stake, and it tries to move away from it and it hurts its ankle. And so it grows up, and when it's a giant elephant, it doesn't think to ever try and get away from its rope, and, coalition and support parties have always had this power, the power to basically just threaten to withdraw their support. Maybe it's been less realizable where there have been more sort of, franchise kind of prime ministers, people like, Helen Clarke or John Key or Jacinda Ardern, who, really could sort of command large swathes of the public's sort of support. But at the same time, it's always been the reality that, you could, a 5% party could pull the plug on pretty much any governing arrangement it's part of, the only exception being Key, who had two partners, either of whom could take him over 50%. But so I think Luxon, he's playing it how he has to. The government has survived. The government is getting a lot of policy things done and progressed. And, he would probably think, well, that's the price I've got to pay. And actually, it's not too bad a price. You can sort of turn the other cheek pretty well. In terms of those personal relationships, I think it's probably fair to say, the three of them aren't going away for a boys' weekend anytime soon. But also, a lot of those relationships happen at the ministerial level. For instance, the sort of infrastructure stuff, the development stuff, Shane Jones, Chris Bishop working together. A lot happens at that staffing level between the chiefs of staff, between advisors, and between their MPs, and those relationships are actually working really well in this government. So, so I think if a bit of a public effacement and a bit of jibing from podcasts is what Christopher Luxon needs to withstand, take in order to have 2 more years as Prime Minister, I think he'd make that trade.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
From your fryer to the table, it's a quick trip for crispy fries. But how about a crosstown delivery? McCain SureCrisp fries are designed to go from fryer to container to carrier to passenger seat across town during rush hour down a shortcut that wasn't all that short to a doorstep before they hit the table. And that first bite, the crispiness speaks for itself. To the last bite, McCain SureCrisp fries. Go the distance. See how far our fries can take your business at surecrisp.com/delivery.
Now, when David Seymour talks about disproportionate influence, Annabelle, certainly there's no doubt he's had disproportionate attention. And I think it's hard to avoid the one piece of legislation that has had outsize attention, eyeballs on it across the course of the first year of the coalition is the Treaty Principles Bill. And that is a bill that is doomed to fail because we've had guarantees from the Prime Minister that it will not become law. His language has shifted slightly, but that's where he is now. And it's unequivocal, I think. That has seen in the period since we last caught up, we've seen a lot of activity. We've seen what I think is pretty clearly accepted as the biggest ever protest on Parliament. We can get into long-running discussions about counting crowd sizes, but it was massive. It was a massive expression in response to the bill and a broader suite of policies that are perceived as being detrimental to Te Ao Māori. We had Hana-Rāwhiti Maipi Clarke's haka in Parliament, which became a global phenomenon. I mean, it's probably getting up towards 1 billion views now. I don't know. Certainly last time I tried to do a back of the envelope, it was 700 million. And so it's extraordinary. And that became either, depending on which radio station you listened to or which social media post you read, it was an incredible expression of New Zealand Indigenous identity and protest and expression, or it was a disgrace to us all. And then more recently, just to wrap this up at the other end, we had TJ Perenera in the standing up to the Italians and demanding of the Italians in a haka that they honour the treaty. The Italians going to do it now, no doubt about that. Anyway, well, obviously it was a political expression. Tell me about what you've seen, what you've noted, what stood out to you over that period. Maybe starting with the Hīkoi, because that's the biggest.
Well,
thing here.
I think the reason the Hīkoi was so big is that, in spite of Luxon's assurances that the bill won't progress any further, there's so much distrust between iwi Māori and the Crown that Māori are taking, no risks and no comfort in those words, and so they're getting out front and centre to make sure that the world knows, their position on this and the strength of feeling about this particular, not just the bill, the disestablishment of Te Aka Whai Ora, all of those things. In terms of the Hīkoi, an incredible turnout. So interesting to see the discussion around the numbers in the media. I came across something the other day that said that the protest in Dunedin was 35,000.
Yeah.
But also numbers saying that the Hīkoi in Wellington, to begin with, was thought to be 35,000. There's no way that those two.
I think David Seymour was among the people attempting to make that point.
There's no way that those protests were a similar number, but it speaks to the caution and almost the reluctance there is about accurately portraying the number of Māori and the strength of a Māori political movement.
Absolutely. Having said that, to say there wasn't just one absolutely massive protest against this government, there was another one in Dunedin. It's not necessarily the most powerful way of rebutting it, but carry on.
And I think now the numbers are looking closer to, is it between 86,000 and possibly 120? Certainly, without a doubt, the biggest protest in the history of New Zealand, would it not be?
Very big. Huge.
The biggest? What would be bigger than that?
Bigger than Trump's inauguration? I don't know. No, I'm not sure what the biggest.
I can't imagine what could possibly have been bigger.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of Hana and the haka, I thought it was an incredible strategy by the Māori party, by Te Pāti Māori, to have Hana lead out that haka. It, has literally captured the imagination of the world. To a certain degree, that it's embarrassing on the international stage is true, but not for the reasons those people say it is. It's embarrassing because New Zealand has a reputation of being world leaders in terms of Indigenous relationships, nuclear-free, all of those things, and now the world, all eyes are on us looking at this piece of legislation, and they're seeing it through an Indigenous lens, led by this young wahine Māori. And I think that this is going to be embarrassing for our government when they're attending international forum, and people are, doing a quick Google of what's going on in New Zealand, and they see this. And I was talking to a former cabinet minister the other day, her name's Sandra Lee, and she was saying that, for someone like Shane Jones, who wants to get international investment into New Zealand in terms of mining, if you're looking at New Zealand as a place to open up a mine, and you open up the paper and you see, over 80,000 people have marched on Parliament, and you've got this, spectacle happening in Parliament of, Indigenous opposition, it makes you a lot less attractive place to potentially set up a mine in, because do you really want to be taking on that kind of fight when you're up against people who are so politically mobile and agile and able to pull together? So I think it's been described as a act of symbolism, but I actually think that the Hīkoi and Hana's haka, which was supported by Penny Henare, Green MPs got up, represents so much more than that, and will have significant impacts for our reputation internationally and who's willing to do business with us.
Even before the haka in Parliament, there are a large number of headlines around the world cropping up over the recent months saying that New Zealand winds back its approach on race relations. Ben, your turn to say some things.
Yeah, look, well, actually going back to that sort of performance review / business book sort of draft chapters thing. I think, was it a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister was on RNZ with Guy and Espiner, and he said, look, I'm not happy with the Treaty Principles Bill. David Seymour's not happy with where it's got to because he only gets the first reading. That's the deal. That's the deal we had to make to get the coalition. I was like, that would be an amazing chapter for Out of the Deal. It's like a lose-lose situation. Another successful outcome from the
everybody is miserable.
Yeah, the treaty principles, schmozzle, huge turnout. Crowd numbers will always be contestable, but absolutely enormous. At the same time, national MPs getting a huge amount of pressure from the other side, particularly in their sort of more rural electorates, where their members and just randoms are sort of peppering them with Hobson's Pledge form emails. And
Hobson's Pledge is not, as best I can tell, running a campaign, which surprises me, on submissions to the bill, but instead is running a campaign urging its supporters to email Christopher Luxon as part of a campaign that it's called Christopher, You Scaredy Cat. And the page for it features numerous examples of Christopher Luxon's head, sometimes bobbing up and down in GIF style, with cat ears on the top of
Folks,
it.
John Ansell has done it again.
He's a mastermind of marketing.
So some wonder about the nature of creativity. You know, does it take place in like the biomechanical processes of a human brain, or are you really opening a portal to sort of muses or divine kind of forces? And I think John Ansell settles the question, and it's the latter. But look, there's a lot of pressure. There's been a couple of polls which, difficult to be determinative because I think this is a really hard thing to poll because you really do often sort of beg the question by the wording that you choose.
I'd love to hear a correct use of beg the question.
It's
what a scholar.
That
is a very rare thing to behold in the wild.
Like some of us are still out here.
People rewind and listen to that. Grammarians rejoice.
And look, it appears that there's about a quarter of, usually around 25% of people are just dead set against any kind of change, and then you've got a larger part of the population that, depending on the question you ask around treaty principles, you'll probably get a majority that sort of think, this sounds all right, because I think Seymour has been pretty good at occupying that sensible sounding middle ground. Now that's not, I don't agree with what he's proposing at all. And I think it's basically unworkable. And I think that got explored in the sort of Q&A interview on Sunday. But, but in terms of presentation, he does the sort of the soothing voice and the look, let's just talk this out sensibly. It's all just about equality. Which is but one reason why I think, the National Party and New Zealand First wouldn't want it to go to a referendum, is because, I don't think you would get a sort of a sensible discussion, that really got into the substance. But this is a very difficult issue. It's turned into this difficult issue, a bill that will never pass. It's turned into a difficult issue for National for this reason. I think Te Pāti Māori will be delighted with how it's going. I think ACT will be delighted with how it's going. I think National and Labour, who have, the two parties who historically have kind of forged this kind of bipartisan consensus on treaty issues, or treaty issues at least sort of to some extent, will be tearing their hair out, or in Luxon's case, sort of
ripping his cat ears off his head,
yes,
furiously,
smiling in a slightly more strained,
raising his back up, and yeah.
And then look, remember, there is a raft of legislation, the amendments to the Marine and Coastal Area Act. There is there's the review of treaty clauses. There's a bunch of things that are happening outside of this treaty principles bill, which, I guess that's the real question, both for Te Pāti Māori and, maybe a wider Māoridom, is can the momentum from this be maintained into a sort of movement, or do you get the vast majority of people kind of declaring victory after this bill dies as we know it will? And that's the real question going forward, I think.
Just one last thing on this, the Perenera haka, which I thought was great, and the question around sport and politics, do they mix? Interesting. Chin stroke. Funnily enough, when Christopher Luxon was asked about, Christopher Luxon, who, by the way, in one of those interviews offered the analogy that he can be the first five and the captain, but he can't play all the positions on the team. So he's free to use sporting metaphors, that's allowed. But in the stand up that was given, and he was asked, what did you make of the TJ Perenera challenge in the haka against Italy? He said, I didn't get to see the whole game because I was on a flight to Queenstown. And then he stopped, and he didn't finish. He stopped there, and I'm pretty sure, I'm confident, I suspect he stopped because the reason he was going to Queenstown was to go and hang out with the touring English cricket team. and to have his picture taken. I think they delayed lunch, the first session, so he could have his picture taken with the two teams, the Prime Minister's 11 and the England team, and give Ben Stokes a big hug and Brendan McCullum a big hug and hang out. So, I mean, to be fair, Christopher Luxon is not saying that sports and politics don't mix. He didn't say that, but I thought that was quite amusing and what's good for the goose, etc. Hey, Annabelle, the gang patch ban has come into force, and we have a new police commissioner, Mr. Chambers, Commissioner Chambers, is that his name? Looks a bit to me like Laura Palmer's dad. Don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Got a very commissioner type face. The gang patch ban seems as though it's one of those things that the kind of consensus seems to be wheeling around to whether it's a good idea or not in terms of curbing gang power. People feel safer about it, and that's enough. Isn't that enough?
I think it's one of those policies that you commit to during an election.
Yeah.
And people sort of breathe a sigh of relief, thinking that they're going to feel much safer as a result. But whether it actually produces any long-term meaningful change is really what matters. And I think most of the kind of experts in this field don't think it will. That really, if you want to get on top of gang crime, then there's no better place to start by reading some of the testimony from the inquiry into historic state abuse, and actually that would foster more meaningful long-term change than what getting people to take their patches off would. I mean, not to mention the fact that many gang members have their gang insignia literally tattooed onto their face. I mean, the amount of admin it's going to create for police who could be investigating or working on other things. So I think it's probably one of those short-term sugar hits that in the fullness of time probably proves not to be that effective. And not the first time either that we've heard this kind of stuff.
Yeah. It did make me wonder, Ben, if what the outcry would be is if you announced as a policy that you were going to oblige all members of particular groups with possible criminal affiliations to wear insignia that made it clear that they were members of that group so that you could recognise them in public and accordingly adjust your behaviour. Well, this is the opposite.
Jared Gilbert in the New Zealand Herald said that that maybe this would stymie the collation of the list of known gang affiliates, which can be used as an aggravating factor in sentencing and can be used to kind of track gang activity more usefully. If people aren't wearing patches, he says it may be harder to collate that information. I think early on we're getting indications. First of all, Mark Mitchell is literally live tweeting the arrests, and what you're seeing is, first of all, that's to really sort of reinforce, look, we're out here, we are actually doing it. It's not just this sort of on paper hoping for sort of compliance thing. And I think, that was necessary to kind of move quickly, because, the worst thing that could happen would be if there was sort of wide-scale flouting of this law, because then it would just sort of increase the public's sort of perception of sort of impotence in the face of the gangs. Also, helpfully, there's a sort of El Capone, tax law sort of aspect to it, which is, in the live tweets, you're seeing things like a patched member was stopped wearing a patch in his car. They found an illegal firearm. They also found that, he had a warrant, and another guy had a warrant out for his arrest that he had been dodging. And so it is actually adding to the stakes of it and kind of signaling, well, maybe it is actually a bad idea to wear your patch in public. And then, of course, as you noted, Annabelle, there is a carve-out. If you have a gang insignia tattooed on your face or your body, you can't be prosecuted for that. And that's because, look, if you're really serious about it, it's fine. They just they just don't want tourists.
Is that being grandfathered in, or if you got a new tat? Is that okay, or is that not okay?
Oh,
have you read the bill closely enough?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, so we can't offer you any advice on that today.
Maybe they'll regulate tattoo parlors, and then you'll only be left with sort of stick and pokes done by your gang associates, and it's sort of the problem will sort of self-regulate out of existence.
On that cheery note, let's go. Let's finish. Happy birthday to your girl, Annabelle.
Thank you. Omiha Pearl.
Omiha. Happy birthday. Thank you, Isaiah, for sitting in.
And happy birthday to all of our big boy, the coalition government.
The big, yep, that's
big
right.
bouncing boy.
We're gonna do a live event at some point, but the date's got a bit muddled up by me. But there will be a live Gone by Lunchtime next year. The last one sold out within minutes.
It's bigger than the Spice Girls.
I think it might have been about 1,000 minutes, but that's still minutes. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be at Q Theatre at some point, maybe like March or April. Have a look, Google it. And thanks, especially just want to thank you, Ben, for your correct usage of Beg the Question.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spinoff, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, @thespinoff.co.nz.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.